Deuteronomy 16 1-22, through the Bible. Chapter 16. Theme: 3 main feasts, Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles. Israel was given 3 feasts, which all the males were required to attend: Passover, Pentecost, or weeks, the Tabernacles. The Feast of Passover. The Feast of Passover was instituted as a memorial to Israel's deliverance from Egypt and their adoption as Jehovah's nation. The Passover is a festival that laid the foundation of the nation, Israel's birth, into a new relationship with God. Observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover unto the Lord thy God, for in the month of Abib, the Lord thy God brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. Thou shalt therefore sacrifice the Passover unto the Lord thy God, of the flock and the herd, in the place which the Lord shall choose, to place his name there. Deuteronomy 16 1-2. To get the background of the celebration of Passover, turn back to Exodus 12. The children of Israel were in slavery in Egypt. Moses had been chosen by God to lead his people out of Egypt and to the promised land. Pharaoh had stubbornly refused to release them, and God revealed his power to Pharaoh by bringing plague after plague upon Egypt. On the fateful night that the final plague was about to descend upon the people, the children of Israel were to express their faith by slaying a lamb and placing its blood outside the door of the home. Upon seeing the blood, the death angel would pass over the house, which spared the firstborn from death. Because the firstborn died in every home where the blood was absent, including his own, Pharaoh released the children of Israel. God wanted his people to remember this tremendous deliverance, and so instituted the yearly feast of Passover. Thou mayest not sacrifice the Passover within any of thy gates, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, but at the place which the Lord thy God shall choose, to place his name in, there thou shalt sacrifice the Passover at even, at the going down of the sun, at the season that thou camest forth out of Egypt. And thou shalt roast, and eat it, in the place which the Lord thy God shall choose, and thou shalt turn, in the morning, and go, unto thy tents. 6 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day shall be a solemn assembly to the Lord thy God, thou shalt do no work therein. Deuteronomy 16 5-8. That was the Feast of Passover. It was to be observed in one place, which was in Jerusalem. All the males of Israel were to go to Jerusalem at that time. The Feast of Pentecost. 7 weeks shalt thou number unto thee, begin to number the 7 weeks, from such time as thou beginnest to put the sickle to the corn, and thou shalt keep the Feast of Weeks, unto the Lord thy God, with a tribute of a freewill offering, of thine hand, which thou shalt give unto the Lord thy God, according as the Lord thy God hath blessed thee. And thou shalt rejoice before the Lord thy God, thou, and thy son, and thy daughter, and thy manservant, and thy maidservant, and the Levite, that is within thy gates, and the stranger, and the fatherless, and the widow, that are among you, in the place which the Lord thy God hath chosen, to place his name there. Deuteronomy 16 9-11. Notice that they were to number 7 weeks after Passover, which would be 49, then the next day would be the Sabbath, the 50th day. Because the Greek word for 50 is Pentecost, this Feast of Weeks is known as Pentecost. It is also called the Feast of Harvest, or the Day of First Fruits. It celebrated the first, or earliest fruits of the harvest. The Feast of Tabernacles. Thou shalt observe the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days, after that thou hast gathered in thy corn, and thy wine. Deuteronomy 16:13. This was another feast of rejoicing. It lasted 7 days, and it too was to be kept in the place which the Lord should choose, which was Jerusalem. 3 times in a year shall all thy males appear before the Lord thy God, in the place which he shall choose, in the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and in the Feast of Weeks, and in the Feast of Tabernacles, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord thy God, which he hath given thee. Deuteronomy 16:16-17. These are the 3 feasts which were to be celebrated in Jerusalem, which all males were required to attend. 3 times a year, they were to travel to Jerusalem, to keep these feasts. It was to be a time of rejoicing. Notice, they were to come before the Lord with joy. Judges in the gates. The chapter concludes with commandments regarding judges. Judges and officers shalt thou make thee, in all thy gates, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, throughout thy tribes, and they shall judge the people, with just judgment. Deuteronomy 16:18. The courthouse in that day was not a building in the center of town, or even in a courthouse square. Instead of being in the center of town, it was at the edge of town, at the gate, in the wall around the city. The reason for that was that it was the place where all the citizens entered or left the city. It was the gathering place, just as the square is the gathering place in some of our little towns. Knowing the human heart, as God does, he warns against distorting justice, about respect of persons, and about accepting a bribe. Thou shalt not plant thee a grove of any trees near unto the altar of the Lord thy God, which thou shalt make thee. Neither shalt thou set thee up any image, which the Lord thy God hates. Deuteronomy 16:21-22. A grove was connected with idolatry, and with sinful worship in that day. That was the reason they were not to make groves. It was in those groves that the altars, and images, and idols, were made to heathen and pagan gods. You can see that this is very close to the worship of the Druids in Europe. Paganism goes in for that type of thing, and God is warning his people against it.